It goes without saying that a good majority of people hate the idea of homeowners associations. They hate the fees, they hate the micromanaging, and they hate the harassment. However, how many of them are actually willing to kill over their hatred for these organizations? This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the global men's lifestyle brand that is revolutionizing the landscape of men's grooming. Once again, they're at the top of their game, giving you absolute peak quality and unmatched value as they bring you the Performance Package version 5.0 Ultra. Let's start out by talking about the Lawnmower 5.0. They've really taken grooming precision to a whole new level with their new, next-gen, dual skin-safe blade heads. Now it even comes with an upgraded trimmer blade and an interchangeable foil blade for even better performance. It's really like having two trimmers in one that are twice as easy to use. The Performance Package 5.0 even comes with the Weed Whacker 2.0, of course. Say goodbye to your bountiful ear and nose hair and finally breathe in some sweet oxygen that forest has been blocking off. Yeah. That's not even it. When you purchase the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, you're also going to get the Crop Soother and the Crop Preserver. These two here are perfectly crafted to keep you feeling cool and comfortable from morning to night. Manscaped also threw in their Shed 2.0, which is basically a cool place to keep all of your gear organized and ready to go, and hey, you'll even get a cool t-shirt. So why don't you join the over 11 million men worldwide who have put Manscaped in charge of their grooming and hygiene needs? Just head over to manscaped.com and get your hands on the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. When you use my promo code DIRETRIP, you'll get 20% off, plus free international shipping, plus 2 free gifts. That's 20% off, plus free shipping, plus free 2 gifts with promo code DIRETRIP at manscaped.com. Trust me when I say that your balls will thank you. Homeowners associations, or HOAs to keep it brief, are elected officials that govern the architecture, maintenance, and lifestyle of the homeowners in a certain building or neighborhood. If you buy a home in a certain area monitored by an HOA, you have no choice but to abide by their rules and even pay dues as if it were some sort of club. HOAs actually have enough power that they can impose fines on you until you're deep in debt or even foreclose on your home if you're behind on your dues. In these cases, homeowners actually have no legal right to a hearing or to even be able to confront their HOA board, as it's technically an organization that you agreed to be in and abide by their rules. You might just wake up with a letter one day saying that your home is going to be sold at auction to pay for whatever HOA fines you may owe. On average, HOAs tend to foreclose on homes when they owe roughly $2,500, and sometimes they only auction your home off for just enough money to get those payments back. Knowing all of that, it isn't hard to see why HOAs have become so hated, especially in recent years. The whole setup is really a recipe for disaster that works both ways. You're either going to get a power-tripping HOA board that abuses its residents, or on the other hand, you might get a violent resident that lashes out at any sort of complaint they receive. That's why, over the years, so many HOA board members have been flat-out murdered. Let's start with what is often considered to be the first major case related to an HOA attack. That would be the story of a 61-year-old man named Richard Glassel who lived in Peoria, Arizona. While living within the Ventana Lakes Homeowners Association, Richard had a lot of complaints about how things were being run. One of these complaints was that other cars would park at the mailbox in front of his home. He complained, but nothing was done, so he mitigated the problem by parking his own car in front of the mailboxes, which didn't help anyone. The neighbors eventually complained enough for the HOA to request him to move his car. When that wasn't done, it was towed instead. Richard also really hated when the HOA landscapers would work around his home. When they told him that he had no choice in the matter, he would get pretty upset. So then the HOA filed a lawsuit against him. After that, they foreclosed on his home. Then Richard moved out to California. For several months, they never heard another word out of him. That is, until he returned on April 18, 2000, armed with a rifle and a few handguns that he picked up from an old storage locker he kept in the area. He prepared throughout the night, showing up at a Peoria community center the next morning. As he entered into the building, 2 HOA board members were leaving. He told them, "You're not going anywhere, go back and sit down." The couple shouted that he had a gun, which he confirmed by saying, "I'm going to kill you all." He decided to take his revenge on the HOA by shooting up a board meeting, firing 8 shots and killing 2 of the members while injuring 2 others. One man tackled Richard from behind, throwing him to the ground as they wrestled for the gun. Richard fired 1 more shot, shooting the man's toe off. Several other people joined in on the fight and managed to hold Richard down until the police showed up. Then the police arrived and arrested him, asking him why he did it. He responded by simply saying, "I'm getting even." At his trial, Richard was given 2 death sentences for the people he murdered and 351 additional years in prison for all the attempted murders. However, after being in prison for only 9 of those years, Richard peacefully passed away of natural causes at the age of 74. In the faraway land of Canada, we have another HOA-related story that, this time, revolves more around a less-than-stable homeowner buying into the organization. This man was named Francesco Villi, or just Frank for short. A man named John Junio and his wife Doreen had taken over an HOA for a condo at Bellaria Residences in Vaughan. For about a year after the takeover, all things went well, aside from Frank. His antics were really starting to take a toll on everybody. Frank would often stop the board members and desk workers in the hallways to complain about trivial matters, like the air quality, feeling vibrations, or being annoyed with what he called toxic electromagnetic waves. When he couldn't find the Janinos, he would contact them over their intercom or call them. John eventually did come out to meet Frank, but he told him that it wasn't part of his duty to do inspections of the other residents. Frank began to call John a bastard to anyone who would listen, saying that he was either a part of the Mafia or the Illuminati, adding that he was slowly trying to poison him with electromagnetic waves. His Facebook became what was basically one long, rambling, hateful rant against John and his wife. Frank would then go on to interact with building security, other residents, and property managers hundreds of times, usually filming while doing so. What he didn't realize was that the videos only made him look crazy and made it clear that he was only harassing everyone else. He began to threaten workers at the front desk, saying he'd start patrolling with a baseball bat. The new property manager had had enough. She sent an email to the board saying that they need to enforce that Frank can no longer harass, intimidate, or threaten either the residents or board members. This only made Frank angrier when he got the letter, so he tried to sue the board for a flat $1 million. There he claimed that the board had poisoned everyone in the building against him, leading to him being harassed endlessly by them. Instead of getting his $1 million, the judge ordered him to stop recording people without their consent and stop posting on social media about them. From now on, he was only allowed to voice his complaints by email. So Frank then tried to sue his own lawyer, saying that he was in on the whole thing. He even went to the police to report this supposed mass harassment, saying he felt his life was threatened. Now here's where the HOA came in with their shenanigans, but not towards Frank. In order to recuperate their legal fees, they split up the cost between all of the condo residents. As the maintenance cost had also just recently increased, they were anything but happy. In 2020, Frank tried one more time to sue the HOA board, demanding millions in damages. When it was alleged that he was mentally ill, he scoffed at the idea. The judge who originally ordered him to leave all the other residents alone ordered him to pay $29,500 for the board's legal costs. Frank complied initially, but soon demanded the money back with interest. The HOA finally petitioned the court to force Frank to move out and sell his condo. This was seen as a last resort, but if anyone deserved it, it was Frank. Frank posted a drunken video to his Facebook at 3 p.m., surrounded by court documents as he complained and slandered the board, the other residents, and the courts. 4 hours later, he loaded up his pistol, walked out his door, and pulled the fire alarm. He made his way up to the 16th floor where 2 board members lived and knocked. As they opened, he shot them both. Another neighbor saw this go down and called 911, hearing more gunfire while on the call. Frank had walked a few doors down to another board member's home and shot him as well. This victim lived just long enough to call the police himself. John and Doreen, further upstairs, had a few guests over for dinner. As they all said bye, the fire alarm went off and they decided to stay for a bit to see what was happening. Then there was a knock at the door. Doreen answered it, only to be shot in the jaw, straight through her head, falling to the ground. Everyone in the home began to throw whatever objects they could find at Frank. John called 911. Frank ran down 12 flights of stairs to his next target's home and he shot the both of them. Now he had shot 6 people. He still had more people on his hit list, though. But suddenly a police officer came into his view. This officer ordered Frank to drop his gun. However, Frank raised it. The officer shot 4 times, hitting Frank twice in the chest. Finally, the paramedics were able to get inside and took Doreen to the hospital. Somehow, she survived. People on the internet, especially on Reddit, saw Frank as a hero. With their vitriolic hatred of landlords and HOAs being a common topic of ridicule on the platform, they were all over this case, not even realizing the series of events that led up to the attack. 5 of the victims, 3 men and 2 women, died from their injuries. Their names were Rita Camilleri and her husband Vittorio Panza, Russell Mancock and his wife Lorraine, and Navid Dada. Frank's 3 estranged daughters, who he abused throughout all of their childhoods, made a statement expressing their condolences for the victims. They said that their father had a very aggressive personality with moods that could easily change on a dime. In another HOA-related case, this one taking place in Florida at another condominium, the Cedar Point condominiums to be specific, we have the story of Hugh Hootman. While the details of the dispute are pretty vague, Hugh had been in an argument with 2 members of his local HOA board, Henry and Ginger Wallace. Ginger had come out to complain to Hugh about something regarding his condo. Hugh apparently didn't take much of a liking to this, getting into a verbal fight with her right then and there. Right before Christmas, Henry and Ginger were walking around the building, heading towards the mailbox when Hugh came to approach them. He abruptly pulled out a gun and shot the 2 of them then and there. They fell to the ground, keys in hand, as he simply left the area. It wasn't long before police were on the scene, bringing the SWAT team after hearing that a public shooting had taken place. They were, by chance, very close to the area when it happened. This led them to catching Hugh before he could get too far. After all, he had just headed back towards his own room. They ordered him down and he fully surrendered within 20 minutes. They saw him come out, a frail-looking 75-year-old man, and slap the handcuffs on him. Hugh was taken into the Martin County Jail to be held without bail. He was hit with 2 charges of first-degree murder. He went on to plead guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder with a weapon. For that, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences. Wally Kuchlewski was a Polish immigrant living in the United States when he decided to buy property in an HOA-run area. Things immediately went sour when he started getting charged fee after fee. He got particularly heated with the HOA secretary, a woman named Rita Homeowner, arguing face-to-face with her on multiple occasions. After failing to pay about $640 in HOA assessments, Wally was taken to court. There he proceeded to lose and was ordered to pay a further $3,484 in attorney fees and court costs. Then he was told that he was going to have to vacate his home. He went home one afternoon to find all of his belongings out on the sidewalk. He looked up to see Rita Homeowner and her roommate, Joyce Shrippy, looking through his things. While Wally said that they were laughing at him and taunting him, we don't know for sure. What we do know is that he returned to his car, pulled out a gun, and started scheming. He decided that he would wait for Rita somewhere and ambush her, choosing to do so when she was leaving her sister's funeral at Franklin Park. He shot her dead then and there. Afterwards, he went looking for Joyce. He found her and shot her too, shooting her in the face, hitting her in the lower jaw. She lost teeth, a portion of her tongue, and a lot of skin, but she survived. Wally was arrested and hit with a charge of murder for shooting Rita and another charge of attempted murder for the grievous injury he caused Joyce. He was thrown into the Cook County Jail and held without bond. When his trial came about 2 years later, he argued that he was a man who had been pushed over the edge after being evicted from his apartment and seeing all of his possessions dumped onto the sidewalk. He wanted a public defender, but he was denied this as he had both a residence and employment. Surprisingly, other residents from Wally's area came forth to say that they were coming together to pay for an attorney for him. It seems that they may have had their own issues with this HOA. When it was his turn to talk, Wally spoke through a Polish interpreter. For 20 minutes, instead of actually speaking about the murders, he instead ranted about his issues with the HOA board, talking more about his carpeting than the actual violence. Joyce appeared in court, facing Wally for the first time since the murder. He refused to apologize for the shootings. So Joyce told him, I find you to be a coward, a liar, and a very dangerous, evil man. A few minutes later, the judge, Thomas Tucker, sentenced Wally to 85 years in prison for the murder and the attempted murder. While the prosecution was seeking 100 years, Wally ended up getting the minimum. Speaking of Wally's age, the judge said, "The minimum sentence in this case is still a death sentence." In 2024, the beef between HOA board members and residents only got more intense, with 2 major cases taking place within the span of a few months. However, while this one definitely involves the HOA, the story here is actually between 2 different homeowners. Jo Junio was a woman who, like others on this list, was living under an HOA. A couple of neighbors didn't like the way she was keeping her dogs and chickens, so they reported her to the board on multiple occasions. The HOA then told Jo about both of the complaints and told her exactly who had reported her. Afterwards, Jo began to repeatedly harass the couple, even threatening them in several instances. Eventually, that family had to take out a restraining order against her and stay at a friend's house, unsure of what she might be capable of. One afternoon, Jo confronted the man, a pastor named Nick Davey and his wife Sarah, in front of their home on Lookout Lodge Lane inside of the gated Court of Aliante, which is a community of townhomes in the Vegas area. Feeling something was about to go down, one of their kids began recording. This was when Jo abruptly pulled out a gun and shot the couple. Jo was arrested soon after at her home, where she was standing in the doorway. She frankly told the officers that she was the one who shot the couple and that she would go quietly. Both of the victims were sent to UMC Trauma, where Nick died, but Sarah luckily survived. Sarah then decided to file a lawsuit against the HOA, saying that they knew very well that Jo had been threatening them for quite some time and that they absolutely should have known that she would turn to violence, given her threats. The lawsuit also stated that Jo didn't have a license to carry a firearm and that she had borrowed the gun specifically for this. Jo Junio is facing charges of murder, attempted murder, battery, and child abuse due to shooting the couple in front of their 2 kids. Jo pleaded not guilty, but either way the prosecutor said that they would not be seeking the death penalty. Jo's next hearing won't take place for quite a while, and it's unclear when the trial will actually happen. Still though, it's a safe bet that she's not getting out of this one. Last on this list, we have the story of a man named Marc Hermann, and his story is very unlike the others. While all of the other stories thus far have involved gun violence, let's just say that Marc went about things in a very different way. While Marc was living under an HOA called the Crown Oaks No. 2 in Seminole County in Florida, he was having the kind of back-and-forth trouble that you might imagine. He owed a lot of fees to the HOA, notably about $4,780 in assessment fees that he refused to pay. He was taken to court by the board, and legally they were able to foreclose on his home and sell it to collect their assessment fees. Marc started ducking anyone who tried to serve him and stopped answering the door. After a few months, his debts ballooned to over $15,000 in assessment fees, dues, and legal fees. Finally, Marc came to an agreement in court. He would pay about $28,000. If he failed to pay in 90 days, he really would lose his house. But before the 90 days were up, he went back to the judge saying that he had evidence that the HOA board had been grossly misrepresenting how much money he actually owed. His lawyer was able to find that the HOA had charged him for future months of fees and assessments that had not yet occurred. He then submitted an affidavit showing that he had fully paid his dues. He attached bank statements as proof, showing that both his dues were paid and that he had automatically been drafted for the other future fees. The HOA's attorney argued that he was taking the improper steps to prevent his house from going on sale. He said that, since Marc had still paid nothing, that the sale would proceed. The judge never again ruled on this, even after being presented with Marc's evidence, so the sale was going down just as planned. 4 days later, firefighters were called out to Marc's home, now engulfed in flames. Neighbors had smelled a strong scent of gasoline before hearing a large explosion that shook their whole building. Marc had lit the home on fire and then shot himself in the neck. He admitted as much to a paramedic that pulled him from the home. Marc lived and was soon charged with 4 counts of arson. Given the huge amount of power that HOA boards have over their residents and the violence that can result from it, a lot of people out there are calling for legal changes to be made related to how these organizations can function. It has become abundantly clear that the current system is a recipe for disaster when it comes to both the boards and the residents. Residents run the risk of losing their home to a greedy, power-hungry board member, while board members also have the risk of running into homeowners who angrily blame them for anything negative that happens in their life. A whole lot of people feel that HOAs shouldn't exist in the first place, but on the other hand, others argue that if you don't like it, then just don't buy into one in the first place. However, with more and more homes being bought up and put under these associations, a lot of people are being left with no choice, especially in certain cities. We'll just have to wait and see if anything changes down the line. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give me a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I've recently started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you find the content on this channel interesting, you might like that one too. I've also opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media, because if anything were to ever really happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.